Hi everyone, it's Michelle Whetstone, and I can't wait to tell you a little bit more about my classroom. And I'm going to start it with using Lincoln Logs. I use these in my high school AP history classrooms, but they're really my 3-year-old's toy. And what's interesting is they kind of look like a cheap piece of wood. And what's even more amazing is they entertain high schoolers, 3-year-olds. They're toys from a really long time ago because I've been using them for 15 years in my classroom. But even more importantly is they just look like a piece of wood until I give my students several of them. And maybe we're building a skyscraper for urbanization, or maybe we're out west and these are the only tools you get. But here they are, and they're learning through little Lincoln Logs that are the same toy that my 3-year-old plays with. And they're able to construct their own knowledge. That's what's amazing about constructivism, because as the teacher, I'm not running around crazy. I'm posing that question to my students, and wow, they are knocking off my socks constantly with what they're learning. So let's go back to what's the basic of constructivism. I love terms when they define themselves. Constructivism is when the students get to construct their own knowledge, when they get to take the material you give them and they get to construct the house, the skyscraper. Sometimes still my 3-year-old a weapon when she's defending herself against the other kids. But they're constructing their own knowledge based off of what they need and how they've just become an expert in it. So the history teacher in me, I have to give you some of the information about the theorist. So, weird word. So these are the guys that came up with the theories. So let's go all the way back to Socrates. In Socrates, teachers use them all the time. Here it is, the Socratic method. I'm going to pose a question to you, the students, and through our discussions, through me asking even more questions, you're going to get the knowledge. And that's what's amazing, is there's nothing more amazing than some days I walk into my classroom, I pose the question, and then I sit back. And the students, through just talking to each other and examining that question, they get it. Now, 2 guys I haven't really heard of. Number 1, Vygotsky. We're going to go with that's how you pronounce it. He said, wow, it's amazing. Humans are social beings that need to interact. Even more importantly, when we talk with one another, not like I'm doing right now, but when we talk to one another, we start learning from one another. So he kind of puts out this idea that, hey, group projects aren't just there to drive you crazy, but group projects are there because students get more knowledge when they can bounce an idea off one another whenever they can share. And then we got Seymour, and I like him because I see more and more teachers doing it. Instead of like, here's the piece of paper, give me the test, I'll give you the grade, is we're assigning them these projects, and not just projects to have parents go crazy like I almost did over my daughter's science fair, but the project that asks the question, and then it's up to the students to learn as they get through it. So project-based learning through Seymour is giving them this time to work with that question you gave them and have them construct a project, and you see it piece by piece as the students are putting it together. So I really think a great way to understand the difference between the traditional classroom, which let's say I grew up in, wasn't that bad, started off teaching using it, and now I've really moved to this constructivism classroom. Traditional classroom, what do we see? Reading, writing, arithmetic, yay! And we saw students, they learned. I learned, couldn't have been that bad. But textbooks are where we learned, and we were expected to sit down and be quiet. If any of my teachers probably walked in my classroom, funny story, we call him our Dean of Discipline, was my 9th grade teacher. When he walks in my classroom, he sees chaos, and I love it because it's so different than how I learned. So the constructivism classroom, I use the idea of the essential question. Every single day, every single week, every single chapter, everything has a question. And I normally pose it over the weekends just to kind of get the students kind of wondering what we're going to do, but also gives them a chance to kind of digest it. So I start with that essential question. So they always have a question to answer. And sometimes the question isn't even on the test. That's what's amazing. And there's this essential question. And then what do we see happening? We see them learning through a variety of sources. I have everything from rap songs to videos to TED Talks to primary sources, secondary sources. I have a lot of cake come into my classroom. I'll show you in a little bit. But the students are learning through a variety of sources and through their own questions. Traditional classroom had the students sitting there, passive, just getting through the day, not a lot of talking. And I call it the lecture and listen. And if you really want to talk about history, teachers, we're excellent at lecturing. We are excellent for an hour and 40 minutes, people, sitting there and just talking. That was the traditional classroom. Teacher's in charge. I'm up in front of you. You're sitting down. And here we go. What is a constructivism classroom? This is my classroom. And it's active learning. And the students are in charge. The students are the ones doing the work. So let me tell you a little bit more about some great examples in my classroom. Right there, we see students. We were mapping out all the countries involved in World War I. Seems simple, but when you kind of understand who's with one another and who's not, next thing I know, we have expos and they're drawing out the map of Europe on my classroom floor to make sure that they understand it. Not on paper, but they want to be able to kind of move it around and change it, and it worked. The next picture, that's one of my students on top of my tables. Okay, I have tables. Desk, I don't even know who really has them anymore, but I have white tables in my classroom. So he's standing up and he is arguing for why Britain was encouraged, allowed, and very enthusiastically made up a rap song about why Britain should be able to tax the colonist. My students still talk about it, and they still talk about either being pro-British or a colonist. It was really, really interesting, and it was a rap song. The next one that you see is the students kind of said like they're sitting there learning. Well, they're sitting there, they're learning. They were doing a speed dating, which is really interesting when you try to explain to a bunch of, nope, they're sophomores, what speed dating is, and they look at you like you're crazy. But having them all take on the persona of one enlightenment, instead of me sitting there lecturing of, this is John Locke, this is Voltaire, this is, well, see, I can't remember all the names, but they sat there and their job was to be one of them. And then their job that day was to find their one true love, if there was one other Enlightenment thinker. And it really was interesting at the end of it, instead of just telling me my true love is, they had to write their true love, a love letter. Very, very important to a sophomore, love is. So they had to write a letter. And then the last one that you see is a group of our upperclassmen came up with a cocoa and crayon session that we do now. It was our first time. Now we're going to do it forever. And we said, hey, help the freshmen learn how to study for midterms. The next thing we know, they're setting up Jeopardy games. They're doing all this stuff, but they were actively learning on a Sunday afternoon. And all I had to provide, cocoa, marshmallows, and some cookies. It was absolutely amazing. But if you notice the difference, traditional, the students are sitting there. Active, they're still kind of sitting there. They're still in my classroom. But they're the ones doing the work. They're the ones taking charge of their education. And they're the ones really getting excited sometimes on top of tables. So traditional classroom, what did an assessment look like? An assessment looked like, sit down, be quiet, here's a piece of paper, and I'm going to give it back to you in red. By the way, I don't grade in red. Number one reason? Because it kind of looks like something died on your paper. I grade in green. Find your favorite color. But constructivism for assessments, traditional, here we go. Here's a piece of paper. You're either right or you're wrong. This is what a constructivism assessment looks like. Is the students are in charge, kind of going back to that project-based learning, kind of going like, here's my question. Now, I want you to show me what you learned. And it's amazing what they come up with. Something way cooler than I could. So, one of the newest fads, and I don't know if it's going to stick around or whether it'll just be great embarrassing videos, is they create TikTok dances. They will come in with a 15-second TikTok dance showing me what they learned. Really hilarious, but do I know that they've learned something? Absolutely. Next one is I will completely always be impressed by art because I'm really good at stick figures. And what I have here is we were back on that lesson where we had the student on top of the table arguing that Britain should be able to tax the colonist. Is these are two students' representations of the different acts in the taxation on the colonist. Can I tell that they learned the same as a student that learned that was dancing on the table, or the kid that did a TikTok? Yes, absolutely. That's what's amazing about it. Here we go. World War One. We read All Quiet on the Western Front. Phenomenal book, probably top favorite, and the kids love it because it's in the perspective from a teenager. And it's different because it's in the German perspective, the losing side. Gets us back to our question from the beginning of the year, which is history only told by the victors? And interesting talk there. But can I tell that he learned what trench warfare is? Yes. Was it a tasty? Yeah, I'm always good for a tasty assessment. Down here on the bottom is the students all had to research a Holocaust. And we had this discussion of it. Do you have to control people to take power over a country? And the Holocaust came into part of that. And very, very touching is some of the kids, we watched a video from YouTube, which was an interview by Oprah. And the students started asking about the shoes that were shown in Auschwitz. And they decided to do a project where they showed me the shoes of the victim that they studied for the Holocaust. And then up here in the top corner was just this year in December. Midterms, I said, you create a study guide and it's part of your midterm. It's something to kind of give them a little bump, especially my AP class as they're preparing for sometimes 6 or other 8 midterms. And I said, whatever you want, just show me something that you studied. It could be a timeline. It could be a PowerPoint, anything. And this student came up with the most amazing graphic notes. So assessment, instead of piece of paper, this is my piece of paper, I gave it to you. You give me the answers that I expect. I'm telling them, show me what you learned. And constructivism, they are constructing their final assessment, and it's awesome. So the PAR model kind of helps keep you focused when you're doing constructivism. Is you want to present, and the big thing that I've learned, a big success here, is you want to give variety. You don't want to give every single day a PowerPoint. We all learned from the office that nobody watches the PowerPoint. If you need to take a quick pause real quick and look up Dwight, go ahead. But your presentation should be full of variety. It should be interesting. I have a big rule in my classroom. If it's boring to teach, it's boring to learn. And last, I really emphasize the objectives. There should be objectives, and they should be very clear from the moment that you start presenting. Next, the longest part of constructivism, and it's sometimes hard because as a teacher or as a parent or anyone, sometimes you gotta let kind of people kind of fail through the process. In an application, it's not that you're going to watch their grades fail, but sometimes they're going to come to the wrong answer, or they're going to come to an answer that's not well supported. And so in Apply, what I've learned is that it's the students taking action. And sometimes our actions fall short, and you got to watch them come back the next day and do it even better because it's their own understanding. And this, like I said, it's going to take up most of their time. And this is when your classroom gets wild. It gets crazy. You have students on tables. It's loud. You have marker all over your floor, broken crayons. But guess what? You'll get through it because they're taking action and they're learning. They're constructing their knowledge. And last is review. And this is a big part of my class. And a lot of the review, I'm going to tell you, is informal, and that's okay. Sometimes teaching, we don't have to take a grade for everything. Sometimes, even in high school, they get a smiley face because they tried that day. And that's really big, that they can know, hey, I'm learning all along the way. And maybe today, all I got was just one part of the answer, but I tried. And so review is part of every single class. We're going to hit back to that essential question. And I want to know anything new, anything different. And in action, they may, from the beginning of class to the end of class, have a whole new idea. And that's when it's going to totally and awesome to watch them really learn. It's that you feel like the light bulb, ding, goes off on top of their head. I should have had a light bulb. Okay, sorry. And what does it really look like? Best example in one of my favorite projects, and I don't get to do as much anymore because it's not emphasized in the AP, is I pose the question whenever I teach the French Revolution, because we just finished the American Revolution, and they get that. They know July 4th, 1776, and they know that the Americas won. And then we switch to the French Revolution, and a lot of people die. And I mean a lot. And so I posed the question years ago as we are seeing more and more violence, and the media shows this and students are aware, is violence necessary? And for me, I also teach in a Catholic high school, and so it's something that also helps me hit another standard that I have to teach, because I have to teach state standard, diocesan standard, and then a national standard for the Catholic schools. But it's just a really interesting question for teenagers that we're hoping that are going to go out there and continue to talk about this. But is violence necessary? And so they go through the different stages of the French Revolution and learn that. They learn that there's a timeline. They learn that there's different stages. They learn that there's people. And our activities, though, we watch Mr. Peabody and Sherman. We watch that very first clip, and the lowest of the fruit. If you don't know that line, take a pause and go watch it. Way better than even the Dwight quote. And then I give them like the Pink song, Just Like Fire, and we go through that. We go through Les Mis, and we watch that song, and just the songs just get them going. And every single day, whenever we're doing work, we're listening to Les Mis, and the kids get it. They can feel the passion in the songs. And we're looking at primary sources. We're looking at secondary sources. They're constructing their own. They do dinner parties. They act out the different social classes. But every single day, they're taking an action, and they're looking at primary sources. So what do I want them to end up presenting is they have to create their own primary sources, which shows me, one, that now they know what a primary source is, and two, that they can take the different perspectives. And every single primary source that they research or create, they have to connect back to, is violence necessary? And we spend almost 3 to 4 weeks doing this. So every single day, the same question is posed: is violence necessary? And then they would come in, we'd talk about what was on the news, we'd review one fact, and we'd say, was violence necessary? And by the end of class, once we do another activity, we end with the same question: is violence necessary? And it was this guiding question. And then some days I would just pose it and put just one act up there, and like the Women's March on Versailles, and the kids would just sit there the entire time and talk about it. And the next thing I know, they're on their computers and they're looking up like the source to be like, no, look, the women are starving, they're babies. And then somebody else is like, nobody said let them eat cake. And this whole conversation is just happening, and wow, you'll be amazed. But what did I say we're doing? Every single day we're reviewing. So look at PAR. We presented that the French Revolution happened and the facts. And then every single day is a different activity, but it all goes back to that review question, which was in the present, and it's all those wheels turning. So constructivism, you really got to be able to step back. You got to be the manager like on a construction job. You can't do it all. You have to trust that your students are going to be able to construct something in knowledge in that lesson better than you could even teach it. So be willing and try constructivism.